After the 10th anniversary dinner my husband cooked himself, I faded into unconsciousness on the living room sofa. He carried me to the car, telling me we were going to the hospital, but when we reached a deserted road, he stopped the engine and popped the trunk. The early rainy season in Bellingham, Washington always carried the heavy scent of damp earth. The sky had not fully darkened, but the clouds hung low and oppressive. Wind swept through the Douglas firs lining the road, sounding like the exhausted sighs of the elderly. Out on the interstate, a passing logging truck made the asphalt vibrate slightly. But inside my home, everything had been so quiet it made my soul uneasy. My name is Vivian Hayes, 43 years old. My husband is Nolan Sterling, 3 years my senior. We had been married for exactly 10 years, living in a cozy, split-level craftsman home in Bellingham. 10 years is not a lifetime, but it was long enough for me to believe I understood the man sleeping next to me every night, right up until he started asking very strange questions about our property deed. When we first got married, Nolan was not a smooth talker. He spoke little but worked hard. Sometimes, during an entire dinner, he would only ask one thing: "Is the soup too salty, honey?" Yet, I found warmth in that. Women who have been through life understand this. Sometimes, happiness is simply having someone waiting for you at the dinner table. Since I was young, my mother taught me that living together requires compromise. If the husband is angry, the wife should speak less. Throughout my 10 years as a daughter-in-law, I was present for every family event. I never dared to miss a holiday or family gathering. If my mother-in-law said something offensive, I chose my moments carefully to reply. The house we lived in was purchased nearly 2 years after our wedding. It was not a mansion, just a split level with a wisteria trellis out front. In the backyard, I grew rosemary and basil. There were times I thought my life was perfectly settled. But that house was not just a shelter from the rain and sun. It held my savings, our joint effort, and a very large financial gift exclusively from my biological mother. My mother, Eleanor Hayes, lives in the nearby rural town of Linden. The day we bought the house, she sold a portion of her farmland and wired me $150,000. That day, she held my hand and spoke very slowly, telling me she was giving this to her daughter, not because she distrusted her son-in-law, but because money and property must be strictly documented. She told me to love him, but not to love him so blindly that I lose my own footing. The money she gave me had bank statements, a handwritten ledger, and my older brother, Julian Hayes, acting as a witness. I kept everything in a designated manila folder. I never brought it up to hold it over Nolan's head, but I kept the important documents securely locked away. For a woman, a single careless signature can cost her entire foundation. Previously, Nolan rarely asked about the house files. Once, I asked him to help me open the filing cabinet to get our property tax papers. He waved me off, telling me to keep it, saying looking at all that paperwork gave him a headache. Yet, about 6 months ago, he began to change. While we were eating dinner, he suddenly asked where I kept the house deed. I looked up and said it was in the filing cabinet, asking why he needed to know. He picked at his food, his voice perfectly casual, saying he just did not know. He claimed that since the house was a joint asset, the husband should at least know where the paperwork was kept. I listened and did not think much of it. But a few days later, he asked about my mother's wire transfer receipt, then our savings account, and finally asked how I would feel if we sold this house to buy a bigger plot of land. I put my fork down and looked straight at him. I asked if he needed money. Nolan smiled, but it was a very forced smile. He asked why my mind went there, claiming he was just thinking about business ventures. He said a man cannot stand still forever, asking how he would provide for the family in the future. I never stopped my husband from doing business, but legitimate business requires clear calculation. Here, he offered no business plan, only circling endlessly around the house deed. Deep in my gut, I felt a small stone drop into a dark well. My mother-in-law, Beatrice Sterling, also started bringing it up. She is 68 this year and loves her son dearly, to the point where whatever Nolan does is justified. For me, disagreeing even slightly meant I was ungrateful. One afternoon, she came over and saw me opening the cabinet to retrieve a file. She stood behind me, remarking that I was awfully guarded, locking up paperwork like it was a gold vault between husband and wife. I turned and smiled gently, explaining that the documents were important, so I kept them safe from getting lost. She dragged out her words, telling me honestly that once a woman is married, she should not hold on too tightly. She said the husband is the pillar of the household and letting him manage the calculations is the right way. My heart skipped a beat. She did not raise her voice, but every word felt like a needle pricking my self-esteem. I wanted to reply, but looking over at my father-in-law, Silas Sterling, I suppressed it. Silas is a gentleman who rarely speaks. That day, hearing Beatrice say that, he looked up at me. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but Beatrice shot him a glare, and he lowered his head. After they left, I stood in the kitchen with a heavy heart. I wondered if I was being too paranoid. Or was Beatrice right, that I was keeping the papers too securely and humiliating my husband? But thinking about Nolan's eyes over the past few days, I could not find peace. He had started taking his phone out to the porch to take calls. Sometimes when I walked up, he would lock the screen incredibly fast. When I asked what was wrong, he just said he was tired. That night, after wiping down the dining table and preparing to head upstairs, I suddenly heard Nolan's voice from the front porch. He spoke very softly, but the rainy night was so still that pieces of his sentences drifted to my ears. Not yet, she's too careful. I froze at the kitchen door. Outside, Nolan went silent for a moment before continuing. Stop rushing me, I know what to do. A pickup truck drove past our street, its exhaust drowning out the rest. I stood in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my chest. When Nolan walked back inside and saw me standing there, he flinched. He asked what I was doing standing so still. I looked at him and asked who he was talking to so late. He avoided my gaze, saying it was a business partner asking about capital, telling me not to overthink it. I wanted to ask more, but his face was tense and irritated. I stayed silent. A woman's silence does not always mean she believes you. Sometimes, she is just picking up the shattered pieces of her suspicion, waiting to see which piece will cut into her heart first. That night, I lay with my back to my husband. Outside, the rain kept falling. In the house I once thought I could lean on, the distance between us suddenly felt longer than the highway from Bellingham to Linden. I did not know the disaster had begun with those seemingly normal questions. Dinner the next evening was simple. I set the table, trying to act normal even though his words from the porch echoed in my head. Sitting across from me, Nolan ate less than usual. He raised his fork halfway and put it back down. I did not push him. Sometimes, pushing with questions only makes people lock their mouths tighter. After eating, I stood up to gather the plates when Nolan told me to leave them, saying he would wash them later and asking me to sit down to discuss something. I paused. In 10 years of marriage, the number of times he voluntarily offered to do the dishes could be counted on 2 hands. Today, his voice was gentle, which made me more suspicious than happy. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Nolan went into the bedroom. A moment later, he brought out a blue folder and placed it in front of me. The sound of the folder hitting the wood felt harsh. He said it was a supplemental asset form, that he planned to take out a small business loan. He claimed the lender required the wife's signature on the house deed to complete the paperwork. I did not open it immediately. I asked how much he was borrowing. Nolan blinked, claiming he wasn't sure yet, that they were reviewing his credit limit, and having the paperwork ready made negotiations easier. His evasive answer made my stomach drop. I opened the folder. Inside were several printed forms. The first page had personal information, social security numbers, and our address. But the further I flipped, the more wrong it felt. There were phrases like full power of attorney, right of disposition, and authorization to transfer and encumber. As I read, a chill ran down my spine. If it was just a normal loan, why did it need such broad, sweeping legal language? I looked up, asking where he got these forms. Nolan lost his patience, asking why I was reading so closely since the lender provided them. I pushed the stack of papers toward him. I told him this was not a standard confirmation form, that it contained a quitclaim, deed, and power of attorney to sell the house, and I would not sign it. Nolan's face darkened instantly. Then he seemingly remembered he needed to play soft. He let out a forced laugh, saying I was acting like he was going to sell the house out from under me. He asked if I really guarded myself against my own husband. I looked straight at him, saying I was not guarding against him, but I could not sign real estate documents without understanding them. I told him if he really needed a loan, we could go to the bank together. Nolan leaned back in his chair, saying I was always like this, always needing everything to be perfect and exact. He complained that after 10 years, I did not even trust him with a signature. I softened my voice, saying trust is one thing, signing legal documents is another. I did not want us fighting over paperwork in the future. Nolan went silent. I thought he would explode, but instead he gathered the papers, stuffed them back into the folder, and gave a cold smile. He said it was fine, that being careful was good, and he was not forcing me. He said he wasn't forcing me, but his hand gripped the folder so tightly the edges bent. From that second, I knew my refusal had touched a very dangerous nerve. Early the next morning, Beatrice came over. She walked in wearing her raincoat, holding a tin of peach cobbler, smiling, but her eyes scanned the room like a detective. I had barely poured the coffee when she asked if Nolan told me about the business loan. I set my mug down, saying he mentioned it, but the paperwork was unclear, so I had not signed. Beatrice immediately clicked her tongue, exclaiming that hesitating in business makes opportunities vanish. She said women often do not understand the big affairs of men. She told me if a husband wants to rise, the wife needs to support his back, not hold his ankles. I replied softly that I was not holding him back, just wanting the paperwork to be clear. She raised her eyebrows, asking how much clearer it needed to be. She told me if I was too guarded, people would look at me and say I disrespected my husband's family. I choked up. She did not ask what the papers were, nor did she ask what I was afraid of. She immediately took Nolan's side, as if her son was inherently right. Just then, Martha Higgins, our neighbor, stopped by to ask for some fresh rosemary. Seeing an outsider, Beatrice's voice turned sweet but sharp. She told Martha that modern daughters-in-law are so capable, holding all the deeds and money, making their husbands beg for a signature just to do anything. She said it was pitiful for the men. Martha gave a sympathetic, awkward smile and looked at me with pity. I stood frozen by the coffee table. Without a single harsh curse word, my dignity was dragged into the middle of the room like an old rag. I wanted to say I wasn't hoarding my husband's wealth, just protecting my own safety. But before the words could leave my mouth, I swallowed them. At noon, Silas came over to drop off some fresh sweet corn from his garden. Seeing me hanging dish towels in the kitchen, he stopped, his voice hesitant. He asked if Nolan had mentioned money to me recently. I looked at him and said yes, that he wanted me to sign loan papers, but I felt they were sketchy. Silas glanced toward the living room, where Nolan was on his phone. He told me if it was not clear, I should not sign, that house paperwork requires extreme caution. I was about to ask if he knew something when Beatrice's voice rang out from the front yard, yelling at Silas for taking so long with the corn. He flinched, the conversation severed. He only had time to give me one look, a look filled with guilt and fear, before turning away. That night, Nolan came home late, saying he was meeting a business partner. Around 11, I heard him on the porch. This time, he walked all the way out to the corner of the yard under the wisteria. I turned off the kitchen lights and hid behind the curtains. His voice was low and tight. I couldn't get her to sign. I told you, she's not easy. The person on the other end said something I could not hear. Nolan grew more agitated. Stop rushing me. 5 days means 5 days. I will find a way to make her leave this house. I stood paralyzed, the dish towel dropping from my hands onto the tile floor without me noticing. That sentence was no longer about a loan. In that sentence, I was no longer his wife, but an obstacle that had to be removed. I did not sleep that night. Nolan lay next to me while I kept my eyes open, staring at the pitch-black ceiling. The rain had stopped, but water dripped continuously from the eaves into a plastic bucket outside. Each drop fell into my heart, reminding me that something in this marriage had fundamentally shattered. Lying beside Nolan, he turned his back to me, his breathing steady as if the shady paperwork and the terrifying words on the porch had never happened. I stared into the dark, asking myself if I was taking things too far. A woman living 10 years with her husband suspecting him of plotting against her based on a few strange sentences sounds heartbreaking. But if I didn't suspect him, and something truly happened, who would save me? At dawn, as the neighbor's rooster crowed amidst the early morning traffic, I got up to boil water for tea. Nolan was still asleep. His phone lay face down on the nightstand, but his hand rested right next to it, as if terrified someone might touch it. Seeing that made my heart heavier. I did not snoop through his phone. I did not want to become a paranoid spying wife. But I could no longer cover my eyes and pretend my home was safe. My ancestors used to say, a house fire reveals the rats. But if you wait until the flames are roaring to run, you will only be left with ashes. Around 7, Nolan said he was going out for coffee with a friend. He changed clothes very quickly, sprayed a bit of cologne, grabbed his phone, and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned back and told me to review the paperwork while I was home, claiming he wasn't forcing me, but business opportunities wait for no one. I simply replied that I knew. The moment the door closed, I stood still. The house still smelled of drip coffee and old rain from the backyard. I walked to the filing cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out the property folder to check. The originals were all there. The house deed, my mother's wire transfer receipt, the handwritten note signed by Julian. Everything was in its place. But when I opened the secondary drawer, I gasped. The stacks of photocopies of our driver's licenses, marriage certificate, and house documents were noticeably thinner. I remembered clearly making multiple sets of copies for future administrative needs. Now, several thin stacks were missing. If they were simply misplaced, Why were only the photocopies gone while the originals remained untouched? I sat down, my heart racing. Photocopies are not enough to transfer a title, but in the hands of someone with malicious intent, they could be used to probe, draft shady contracts, or create a pretext for whatever they had planned next. I grabbed my phone and called my brother, Julian. He picked up immediately, asking if something was wrong since I was calling so early. Hearing his voice, my throat choked up. I never liked burdening my biological family. After getting married, I usually swallowed the joys and sorrows of my in-laws by myself, but this time I didn't dare swallow it. I briefly told him about Nolan asking for the papers, the power of attorney, Beatrice's passive-aggressive comments, and what I heard Nolan say on the porch. I didn't exaggerate or add salt. I only reported exactly what my eyes saw and my ears heard. Julian went silent for a moment before asking if I was certain Nolan said he would make her leave this house. I replied softly that I heard it clearly. Julian's voice dropped. He told me from this day forward, do not sign anything. Keep the originals completely hidden. He said if Nolan asked me to go anywhere alone at night, I had to alert him. I bit my lip, saying I hadn't dared to think Nolan would do anything too extreme. Perhaps he was just in debt and being pressured. Julian sighed, explaining that being in debt requires even more caution. A gentle person cornered to a wall will act recklessly, let alone a man keeping secrets from his wife. Hearing that made my blood run cold. Julian was a man of few words, but every word made sense. I reminded him that November 18th was our wedding anniversary. I told him if he didn't hear from me that night or couldn't reach me to please come check on me. He instantly asked why wait until then. I looked out at the yard where water droplets clung to the wisteria leaves. I told him I didn't know, but Nolan kept bringing up that date recently and I had a terrible gut feeling. Julian didn't scold me for being superstitious. He simply said a woman's intuition is rarely a joke. He told me to prepare just in case. After hanging up, I took out an old spare smartphone from a drawer. Julian had bought this phone for my mother when she was taking medical trips. Because she sometimes forgot her way, he had installed a permanent location-sharing app so we could track her. When she got a new phone, she left this one with me. I fully charged the battery, deleted unnecessary apps, and turned on location sharing with Julian for the next 10 hours. I tested calling, recording, and turning down notification volumes. Everything I did was slow, but my hands were shaking. I never thought the day would come when I would have to prepare for battle inside my own home. I grabbed a light brown trench coat and slipped the burner phone into the inner pocket. The coat usually hung near the kitchen door, where Nolan rarely noticed it. I told myself if I needed to confront him about the debt and paperwork, I would hit record first, not to harm him, but to have proof so I wouldn't be accused of making things up later. At noon, Eleanor called to ask if I was coming down to Linden for the weekend family memorial. Hearing my mother's voice made my eyes sting. I wanted to cry out, "Mom, I'm scared," but I didn't. She was older, with fluctuating blood pressure. I didn't want her losing sleep over something that hadn't fully materialized yet. I just told her I would see how my chores went and that she needed to take her medication on time. She smiled gently, telling me to rest if I was tired and not to hold everything inside, because if a woman holds too much in, her heart will eventually hurt. I turned my face away and wiped a tear. She had no idea her casual words hit the softest, most vulnerable part of my soul. As evening fell, Nolan came home holding a box from a bakery containing a slice of red velvet cake. He placed it on the table, his tone perfectly normal, saying he bought my favorite. I looked at the cake, then at him. A husband who just the night before said he would make his wife leave the house, buying her favorite dessert the next day. If this were in the past, I would have been happy. Now, I only felt dread. Kindness delivered at the wrong time can be colder than a curse. That night, I ate a small piece of the cake, complimented it, and quietly hung my trench coat near the door like always. In the pocket, the burner phone lay completely silent. Its screen was black. I prayed I wouldn't have to use it. I prayed my intuition was wrong. But deep down, I knew that just because the rain hasn't fallen yet doesn't mean the sky is clear. Sometimes, the dark clouds are just waiting for enough wind to cover the entire roof. On November 18th, it rained in Bellingham from early afternoon. It wasn't a downpour, just relentless drizzling that soaked the front yard and made the wisteria droop like someone weeping. I came home from the grocery store carrying fresh vegetables, tomatoes, and steaks for dinner. Despite the chaos in my heart, I figured a 10th anniversary deserved a proper meal. If husband and wife have issues, they need to sit down and talk. Silence only widens the cracks. But as I opened the front door, I saw Nolan's shoes neatly placed by the entrance. He was home earlier than usual. From the kitchen came the sound of a knife on a cutting board, and the rich scent of garlic and simmering broth wafted out. I stopped dead in my tracks. In 10 years of marriage, it wasn't that Nolan had never cooked, but him preparing dinner like this on his own was incredibly rare. Seeing me, he turned around, his hands still wet from washing vegetables. He smiled and said, "You're home? Let me cook for our 10th anniversary tonight. Go rest." I looked at the groceries on the counter: filet mignon, garlic butter shrimp, asparagus, a bottle of Pinot Noir, and a creamy truffle mushroom soup simmering on the stove. There was also a vase of white lilies. White lilies were my favorite flower when we first got married. I hadn't mentioned them in years. Yet today, he remembered. If this had been a month ago, my heart would have melted. When a woman lives long enough in emotional starvation, sometimes a single bouquet of flowers is enough to bring tears to her eyes. But looking at the white lilies now, my chest felt heavy. I asked why he was off work so early. Nolan laughed, saying it was a special day and he wanted to do it right. He turned back to the stove, leaning down to taste the mushroom soup. His demeanor was so calm that if the events of the past few days hadn't happened, I would have blamed myself for being paranoid. I set my grocery bags down to help, but he waved me away. "Go upstairs and shower. I've got everything tonight. I don't want people saying that after 10 years I can't even cook my wife a meal. That'd be embarrassing." I gave a faint smile. "Since when do you care about being embarrassed?" He looked back, his eyes flashing briefly before he chuckled. "Well, everything is on the internet these days. A man who doesn't pamper his wife gets dragged online instantly." That witty remark might have made me laugh on any other day, but I just nodded and walked upstairs. While changing, I peered through the staircase slats at my brown trench coat hanging near the kitchen door. The burner phone was still in the pocket. I hadn't hit record yet. I told myself to stay calm, not to let fear make me act clumsy. When I came back down, the table was mostly set. The truffle mushroom soup sat in the center. The filet was perfectly seared, the shrimp glistened with butter, the asparagus was vibrant green. Nolan even pulled 2 crystal wine glasses from the cabinet and poured a small amount of red wine into each. He pulled out a chair for me. 10 years, Vivian. Time flies," he said. I sat down and looked at the feast. Every dish was my favorite. The more perfect it was, the more uneasy I felt. Nolan raised his glass. "These past 10 years, I've put you through a lot. I have a temper and my business ventures haven't panned out. Today, I want you to remember this day in a better way." I looked at him for a long time. That face used to be the place I believed I could seek refuge. I had wiped his sweat when he had a fever, sat in emergency waiting rooms when he had a minor car accident, hid my tears when his family blamed me for our struggles to have children. 10 years isn't a piece of paper you can just rip up. I clinked my glass very softly against his. "I just hope that whatever happens, we tell each other the truth." The hand holding his glass twitched, but he immediately smiled. "I am telling the truth. I want to start over, to take better care of you." He served me some asparagus and ladled a bowl of the creamy mushroom soup, placing it right in front of me. Steam rose from the hot bowl. I watched him ladle a bowl for himself, but he only took a small scoop of the broth. He barely let his lips touch the wine glass. I asked why he wasn't eating the soup. He answered quickly that he got full just tasting it while cooking, telling me to eat it while it was hot. I picked up my spoon, my heart pounding. Small details were connecting. The power of attorney, Beatrice's words, the porch conversation, the phone placed face down, and now, the separate bowls of soup. Just then, Nolan's phone lit up. He glanced at it rapidly and slammed it face down. A moment later, it buzzed again. He frowned and stood up. "Let me take this outside." He stepped out onto the porch. The rain was still drumming relentlessly. I sat completely still, straining my ears. His voice was low, masked by the rain, but a few phrases slipped through. "Why is Mom calling now?" Silence. "I know, just don't make a scene tonight." I felt my heart tighten into a knot. A moment later, Beatrice's voice came through the phone loud enough to catch the tail end. "The house paperwork needs to be done. Don't let her back out." Nolan dropped his voice instantly. "Keep your voice down." He walked further toward the gate. I looked down at the bowl of soup in front of me. It had cooled slightly. An anniversary dinner, a suddenly gentle husband, a call from the mother-in-law demanding house paperwork. All of it felt like thin threads, harmless on their own, but twisted together, strong enough to strangle someone. When Nolan came back inside, he was still smiling. "Mom was asking if we were coming over for dinner tomorrow. You know how the old lady is, always nagging." I looked at him. "Did she mention the paperwork?" His smile went rigid. "Where is your mind going again? It's our anniversary, don't bring that up and ruin the mood." I stayed silent. In front of me was the soup he had just served. In my coat pocket near the door, the burner phone lay dormant like an unblinking eye. I wondered if I should stand up and hit record, but if I did it right then, Nolan would know I suspected him. I took a few spoonfuls of the soup. The rich taste of mushrooms and truffle everything was terrifyingly normal. Nolan watched me eat, his gaze far more intense than necessary. I put the spoon down and picked up some asparagus, trying desperately to keep my hands from shaking. Outside, the rain grew heavier, hammering against the back patio roof. I was sitting in the middle of a 10th anniversary dinner, next to a husband treating me tenderly, yet my soul was freezing as if someone had thrown open a door to a blizzard right into my chest. I forced myself to eat a few more bites to stay calm. They say when you have suspicion in your heart, you see shadows everywhere. I feared I was turning our anniversary into a silent tribunal, condemning my husband before he even spoke. But the strange sensation hit me very fast. At first, it was just a flush of heat down my neck. I thought it was the wine, but the amount Nolan poured was minimal. I had drank wine at weddings before. I never felt my head grow heavy like a lead weight after a few sips. I put my fork down. Nolan. He looked up immediately. Yeah, what's wrong? I swallowed hard. My throat was burning dry. Both ears started ringing. The sound of the rain on the roof sounded far away, then close, then far again, as if someone was turning a volume dial. I feel really dizzy. Nolan stood up instantly and walked around to support my shoulders. His reaction was too fast. Too fast to be genuine surprise. Your blood pressure must have dropped. Sit still, I'll take you to the hospital. I gripped the edge of the table. The wood beneath my palms was freezing. I looked at my bowl of soup, then at his wine glass. My glass was half empty. His was practically untouched. My soup bowl was partially eaten. His only had a few streaks of broth. I forced every word out with agonizing difficulty. What did you put in the food? Nolan's face hardened just for a split second, but I saw it clearly. Then he frowned, acting deeply offended. What the hell are you talking about? I cook you an anniversary dinner and you accuse me of drugging you? I wanted to respond, but my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. The dizziness spread down my shoulders and into my arms. I tried to stand, but my knees buckled instantly. Nolan caught me, repeatedly saying, "We have to go to the ER. Right now." If he was truly worried, he would have called 911. If he was truly panicking, he would have called Julian or my mother. If he was truly taking his wife to the hospital, he would have grabbed my ID, my insurance card, my purse, and at least asked if I was still conscious enough to know which hospital to go to. But he did none of those things. He hastily grabbed my main smartphone off the table, hit the power button to turn the screen black, and slammed it face down next to the white lilies. That action pierced me like a thin blade. I tried to reach for it, but my fingers only grazed the tablecloth. He was leaving my phone. A human life is on the line, yet he didn't call an ambulance. He half-carried, half-dragged me toward the door. The freezing rain whipped onto the porch. As we passed the brown trench coat hanging near the kitchen, I forcefully leaned my weight. Nolan thought I was falling and yanked me harder. The coat slipped off the hook and tangled around my legs. Using the absolute last ounce of my strength, I hooked my toe into the fabric, dragging it with me out the door. "I'm cold," I whispered hoarsely. Nolan snatched the coat and threw it haphazardly over me. He didn't know that inside its pocket was a fully charged burner phone. Nor did he know that earlier, when he had stepped out to take Beatrice's call, I had reached under the table with trembling hands and activated the voice recorder. He loaded me into the car. My entire body was limp like jelly. My head rested against his shoulder, and the emotional agony made me want to vomit. 10 years of marriage. I used to believe that if I ever fell, this arm would save me. Yet now, this exact arm was dragging me out of my house into an unnamed terror. Nolan laid me across the back seat. The trench coat slipped down to the floorboard, the burner phone bumping gently against the seat track. He didn't notice. He slammed the back door shut and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. I cracked my eyes open and looked through the window. Our little house faded into the rear view, the wisteria blurred by the rain. On the dining table, the bowls of soup were still there, the lilies were still there, and my main phone remained face down like a gagged witness. Pulling out of the neighborhood, taking a left would lead to the main county hospital. But the car turned right. My heart was crushed in a vice. I tried to speak. The hospital is the other way. Nolan glanced at the rearview mirror. His eyes swept over my face, cold and swift. The main road is jammed. I'm taking a shortcut. What shortcut leads toward the old county cemetery road? I had lived here for 10 years. I wasn't an out-of-towner who would believe anything. That road was desolate during the day. On a rainy night, it was abandoned. Both sides were flanked by empty lots, overgrown fields, and a few shuttered lumber yards. I wanted to fight, to jump up, but my body refused to obey. My eyelids were incredibly heavy, my throat burning like sandpaper. I bit down hard on my own lip, using the pain to keep myself tethered to consciousness. The metallic taste of blood seeped onto my tongue. I was terrified that if I completely passed out, I would never get the chance to tell the rest of this story. Nolan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, put in an earpiece, and lowered his voice. "I'm on the way." I strained my ears, but the rain battering the windshield was so loud I only caught fragments. "No, I left her main phone at the house." Silence. "Yeah, I'm almost at the spot." I closed my eyes, tears spilling out silently. By then, I no longer wondered if I was being paranoid. A husband rushing his wife to the hospital does not leave her phone at home. A husband going to the ER does not drive down an abandoned cemetery road. A husband trying to save his wife does not tell someone on the phone that he is almost at the spot. The car hit a pothole, jolting violently. The trench coat on the floorboard slid closer to my feet. I managed to twitch my foot, letting my toes rest against the fabric. Inside that pocket, the burner phone lay still. I didn't know if the recorder was still running. I didn't know if the GPS signal was reaching Julian. I only knew I was clinging to that microscopic sliver of hope like a drowning person clinging to a piece of driftwood. Outside the window, the glow of residential houses vanished. The road grew pitch black. The headlights cut through the rain, illuminating thin, ghost-like streaks of water. I heard Nolan breathing heavily, his fingers drumming erratically on the steering wheel. I wanted to scream his name, to demand what he was planning to do to me, but the shout lodged in my throat, coming out only as a pathetic rasp. The car continued, tearing down the desolate road. Lying in the back, I realized for the first time that people don't always die from a poisoned bowl of soup. Sometimes they die the moment they realize the person who wants them to disappear is the same person who calls them his wife. The car drove on for a long stretch. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. Every time the car bumped, my head tapped against the seat, throbbing dully. But that pain kept me from sinking entirely into the void. I peeked through the window. The dense housing near the town center was gone. Streetlights were sparse, replaced only by the faint yellow security bulbs of closed lumber yards. Further out, silhouettes of dark pine trees stood motionless in the rain like a line of mute sentinels. Nolan was driving incredibly fast. One hand on the wheel, the other occasionally tapping his Bluetooth earpiece. He didn't look back at me anymore. He probably assumed the drugs had taken full effect and I was too far gone to hear or remember anything. Or perhaps, in his mind, I was already no longer a wife, but a problem requiring disposal. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered immediately, his voice low but frantic. "I told you I'm already on the way." The voice on the other end belonged to a woman. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the tone was shrill and urgent. My heart seized. Even though she hadn't stated her name, a shadow materialized in my mind. A woman close enough to call my husband at this hour, intimately aware that I was being transported. Nolan gritted his teeth. "Stop bringing up Damien Thorne. I know I have 5 days." I lay perfectly still, my fingers digging into the leather seat. Damien Thorne. A strange name, but Nolan's tone proved this wasn't an ordinary business associate. His voice carried suppressed terror, like a fish hooked on a line, bleeding the more it thrashed. The woman on the other line spoke rapidly. Nolan angrily lowered his voice. "I left her primary phone at home. Tomorrow morning, just tell people she ran off. Say she was jealous, she threw a fit, she packed up and left. It won't sound unusual." I listened, and it felt like someone was stomping on my chest. She. He referred to me as she. The man who had shared my bed, eaten my cooking for 10 years, was now talking about me like an inconvenient piece of luggage. I wanted to spring up, to scream in his face that I could hear him, but my throat was raw, and my breath escaped as a microscopic wheeze. I bit my lip harder, drawing more blood, pulling myself back to reality by a thread. Nolan continued, "No, we can't touch the paperwork here. We'll handle it later. Tonight, we just need to make people believe she abandoned the house." The car began to decelerate. The rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers felt cold and mechanical. The downpour had lessened, but the humidity fogged the glass. Nolan used his sleeve to wipe a circle on his window, then glanced in the rearview mirror. I immediately squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering chaotically. If he realized I was still lucid, I had no idea what he would do. The man who dared to drug his wife and drive her to a deserted road had crossed every boundary of human decency. The woman on the phone seemed to ask if I was still awake. Nolan threw a quick glance over his shoulder and replied, "The dose was enough. She was mumbling earlier, now she's out cold." Hearing the dose was enough froze the blood in my veins. There was no more doubt. The dizziness, the dry throat, the paralyzed limbs, none of it was the wine or a drop in blood pressure. The man who cooked my anniversary dinner had slipped something into my food, playing the part of a frantic husband. The worst pain wasn't the fear of death. It was the flood of 10 years of memories crashing into me like a tidal wave. I remembered our wedding day, Nolan clumsily pinning a flower in my hair, his hands shaking so much his cousins mocked him. I remembered my first night at his family's house, crying because I missed my mom, and him sitting on the porch getting me warm water. I remembered the times he ran out to buy me soup when I was sick. Could all of that really be completely eradicated by a debt, another woman, and a house? I tried to move my foot. The trench coat on the floor was touching my toes. Inside the pocket was the burner phone. I didn't know if the screen was facing up or down, or if the audio recorder was picking up these horrific words. I only knew that if God granted me one shred of luck, Julian would see my GPS dot. The car turned onto a narrower road. The tires splashed through a puddle, making a loud tearing sound. The smell of mud, wet grass, and the faint scent of old funeral incense crept through the vents. I recognized this stretch. Up ahead was the road skirting the old county cemetery. It was abandoned during the day. At night, it was a black void. Nolan ended the call. The car was silent except for the engine and the rain. A moment later, he muttered to himself, "Don't blame me, Vivian. You brought this on yourself being so stubborn." That sentence made tears slide down my temples. Stubborn. I was stubborn because I refused to sign fraudulent paperwork. I was stubborn because I protected the money my mother gave me. I was stubborn because I refused to let my blood, sweat, and tears be gambled away by his greed. If that was stubbornness, then women like me had to be stubborn just to survive. I gathered all my strength and let out a very faint groan. Nolan slammed the brakes, the car jerking violently. His spine went rigid. Through the mirror, I saw his eyes locked onto me, bulging. "You're awake?" I couldn't answer. My mouth felt packed with sand. He turned around, and the fake panic from the dinner table was entirely gone. His eyes were cold, alien, and dark. "What did you hear?" I closed my eyes, feigning a lapse back into a coma. The silence stretched until I couldn't breathe. Then, he cursed under his breath, slammed on the gas, and kept driving. For the first time in 10 years, I realized I had to play dead, just to survive my own husband. The car stopped in a pitch-black clearing. The engine idled quietly. Outside, the rain was tapering off, leaving only the wind howling through the trees. Nolan sat frozen for a few seconds before opening his door and stepping out. The slam of the car door sounded as heavy as a vault locking shut. I lay paralyzed, my eyes cracked open a fraction of an inch. Outside, Nolan's shadow moved to the back of the car. The trunk popped open. The sound cracked through the dead night like a snapping bone. I lay in the back seat, fighting the drugs that turned my muscles to liquid while my mind remained agonizingly sharp. Fear had overridden the sedatives, my survival instinct clawing to hold on. Outside, Nolan was dragging something out of the trunk. The rustle of plastic tarp, the clink of metal against the bumper, his heavy, frantic breathing. I strained my eyes toward the window. Under the dim, sickly yellow glow of the taillights, I saw a roll of blue tarp drop to the dirt. Next to it was a bundle of heavy-duty zip ties, a pair of rubber gloves, a folding tactical shovel, and a battered duffel bag. My heart went into overdrive. Those items are not used to take a sick person to the ER. Nobody packs a tarp, zip ties, gloves, and a shovel for a drop in blood pressure. I wanted to scream, to smash the window, to sprint into the woods, but my limbs felt like they were chained to boulders. My throat only managed a raspy wheeze, so quiet I could barely hear it myself. Nolan bent down and rummaged through the duffel bag. He pulled out an old fleece jacket of mine, a pair of worn-out sneakers, and a scarf I usually kept in the closet. Looking at those familiar items chilled me to the marrow. They were not there by coincidence. He had meticulously packed them. Suddenly, the plan clicked. If I disappeared tonight, the police would find my personal belongings scattered somewhere, concluding that I had run away on my own. A woman rumored to be paranoid and jealous, fleeing into the night in a rage it was just plausible enough for the town to gossip about for a week and move on. My reputation, my life, all neatly stuffed into a garbage bag. Nolan stood up and scanned the perimeter. The cemetery road was completely deserted. Flanked by overgrown weeds and dark silhouettes of eucalyptus trees, the air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves, making me nauseous. In the distance, the faint outlines of tombstones stood silently behind a wrought iron fence, witnesses without a voice. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the brush by the side of the road. It was a woman wearing a black raincoat, a baseball cap, and a medical mask covering half her face. She walked hurriedly, constantly checking over her shoulder. I held my breath. The woman approached the car and pulled her mask down slightly. "What took you so long? We shouldn't be parked here." That voice made my blood freeze solid. Valerie Pierce, the woman Nolan had introduced as his trusted real estate contact. She had even come to my house for coffee, calling me sweetie with a voice like honey. That day, she wore a sharp blazer, smiling warmly and praising me for being lucky to have a forward-thinking husband. I remembered cutting up fresh fruit for her. Looking back, that fruit was nowhere near as sour as human nature. Nolan hissed, "Keep your voice down. She might still be awake." Valerie flinched and peered into the back seat. I instantly shut my eyes, letting my body go entirely limp. My eyelids were heavy, but I could feel her gaze scanning my face. "She's still awake after that? Did you give her the full dose?" Hearing that made me want to gag. So Valerie knew. Not only did she know, she was actively checking the dosage. The woman who drank my coffee, who smiled in my living room, was now standing outside a car in the dead of night, asking my husband if he had poisoned me sufficiently. Nolan replied irritably, "I gave her enough. She just has too much fight in her." Valerie lowered her voice, but her anxiety was palpable. "Don't get cold feet now, Nolan." Damien Thorne said it himself. 5 days. If he doesn't have the money, he's taking the text messages and the fraudulent papers straight to the police. I go to jail, you go to jail. Without her signature, we at least have to make sure she's gone for a few days so we can forge the escrow papers. I listened, and every syllable, every breath the two of them took cut through the silence. $120,000. 5 days. Documents. Signatures. The puzzle pieces from the last few months violently locked together. Nolan snapped, "Don't talk about the paperwork here. What if she hears?" Valerie scoffed. "If she hears, what is she going to do? She's paralyzed. You just needed to be decisive from the start. If she had just signed the deed, nobody would have to suffer." I wanted to open my eyes and stare a hole through her skull. I wanted to ask why their suffering required my near murder, but I couldn't. I just lay there, tears tracking silently into my hair, my soul clawed open. Nolan walked over to the back door and pulled it open slightly. A gust of freezing wind rushed in. I smelled wet nylon and stale cigarette smoke on him. His hand touched my shoulder, shaking me roughly. "Vivian." I didn't answer. He leaned in closer. His tone softened, but there was zero affection left in it. It was the tone of someone dealing with a heavy burden. "Don't make this messy. If you're awake, listen to me. Don't blame me." I was backed into a corner. "If you had just signed the papers, I wouldn't have had to go this far." That sentence was the final dagger into whatever trust I had left. Even in this moment, he blamed me. I didn't sign, so he had the right to drug me. I protected my assets, so he had the right to drag me to a cemetery road. I protected myself, which made me the villain who pushed him over the edge. Valerie urged from outside, "Hurry up, Nolan. If a patrol car comes by, we're screwed." Nolan reached in, about to drag me out. Gathering every microscopic drop of willpower I possessed, I twitched my foot. My toe nudged an empty plastic water bottle under the front seat. I kicked it weakly. The bottle rolled and clacked against the door panel. Nolan froze. Valerie went dead silent. In that agonizing split second, the faint, unmistakable hum of a vehicle engine echoed from down the road. At first, it was a low rumble, then it grew louder through the damp night air. A pair of headlights swept across the tree line, illuminating the wet asphalt. Nolan immediately dropped my shoulder and spun around. Valerie yanked her mask up and scrambled backwards into the tall grass. I lay completely still, my heart caught between euphoric hope and sheer terror. Hope that someone was finally here. Terror that if they just drove past, I would be plunged permanently into the abyss. The headlights washed over the puddle-strewn road. Nolan bent down instantly, grabbing the empty water bottle and shoving it under the seat as if the noise itself would betray him. Valerie was crouched in the eucalyptus shadows, shrinking into the dark but staring fixedly at the approaching truck. The vehicle slowed and pulled up just a few feet from our bumper. It was a pickup truck with an amber flashing light on the roof. The man inside wore a high-vis jacket over a raincoat and a baseball cap. He rolled his window down and shined a heavy-duty maglite out. "Everything all right here? Awful late to be parked on this stretch." I recognized that voice. Hank Brody. He ran the local neighborhood watch and sometimes did security patrols for the HOA properties nearby. He was a stocky, no-nonsense guy who had come by my house a few times to collect neighborhood dues. He was straightforward but incredibly observant. Nolan slammed the trunk shut and pivoted on his heel. His face morphed in a fraction of a second. The murderous tension vanished, replaced instantly by the frantic panic of a desperate husband. "Officer? Thank God." Nolan lied, calling him officer to play to his ego. My wife passed out. I'm rushing her to the ER, but the rain was so bad I got turned around on the back roads. Hank squinted at the dark road ahead, then at Nolan. Rushing to the hospital? By driving down Old Cemetery Road? The interstate to the ER is 5 miles in the opposite direction. Nolan forced a desperate chuckle. I thought this was the shortcut to the county clinic. She's really weak, I'm just panicking. I listened to every word, my throat constricted. He was an incredible actor. If it wasn't for the open trunk, the blue tarp, the zip ties, and the woman hiding in the bushes, anyone would have believed he was just a terrified husband. Hank opened his truck door and stepped out, heavy boots hitting the pavement. He shined his mag light directly through the back window, the beam striking my face. I wanted to pry my eyes wide open, to scream for help, but the drugs pressed down on my eyelids like lead weights. All I could do was weakly twitch my fingers. Nolan moved quickly, blocking the window. Please, sir, let me just get her to the doctor. Standing out here in the cold is making it worse. Hank didn't step back. He lowered the beam of his flashlight to the ground. The blue tarp was still lying by the rear tire. A stray zip tie sat in the mud near Nolan's shoe. The folding tactical shovel had been kicked under the bumper, but the handle was clearly sticking out. Hank furrowed his brow. Your wife passed out, and you've got a tarp, zip ties, and a shovel out of your trunk? Nolan choked. That's landscaping gear. I keep it in the car. Landscaping gear? You pulled a tarp and a shovel out in the middle of a downpour at midnight on Cemetery Road. Hank's questions swung like a sledgehammer, shattering Nolan's act. Valerie, hearing this, took another step back. A dry branch snapped sharply under her boot. Hank whipped his flashlight toward the brush. Who's over there? Valerie didn't answer. She turned and bolted into the thicket, her black raincoat vanishing into the rain, leaving only the sound of frantic footsteps fading away. Nolan went pale. Probably just a transient, sir. Look, please, I have to get my wife to the hospital. He reached for the driver's door handle, but Hank threw a heavy hand against the metal, slamming it shut. Hold on. Something ain't right here. I'm calling the sheriff. Nolan lost his temper. You can't do that. If something happens to my wife, are you taking responsibility? Are you? His voice escalated into a bark. I knew he was terrified. A normal person trying to save their spouse would be begging the patrolman for an escort. Only a guilty man fears another's flashlight. I summoned every ounce of air in my lungs. My throat felt like it was lined with broken glass. I wanted to scream for Hank, but the sound that came out was a pathetic, microscopic moan. But Hank heard it. He leaned in close to the glass. Ma'am? Mrs. Sterling? Can you hear me? Tears poured from my eyes. I managed to slide my foot. The brown trench coat on the floorboard shifted. The burner phone in the pocket hit the metal seat track, and the screen suddenly illuminated. For a brief second, the glowing red recording icon was visible through the fabric. I dug my toe in and kicked the coat. The phone slid out of the pocket and clattered against the door panel. The bright screen stared up from the darkness like an open eye. Hank shined his light on it. Whose phone is that? Why is it recording? Nolan lunged to open the door and grab it, but Hank violently shoved him back. Step away from the vehicle! I'm calling the deputies and her family right now. Nolan gritted his teeth. You have no right to interfere in my family's business. Hank stood firm, his hand hovering near his hip. When your wife is passed out, you've got a shovel and zip ties in the dirt, and a woman running into the woods, it ceases to be your family's business. That sentence made me want to sob hysterically. When my own husband had stripped me of my voice, a complete stranger had spoken the absolute truth. Hank backed up, dialing his radio to connect with the county dispatch. Nolan looked around wildly. He was clearly calculating if he could jump in the car and flee, but running would only seal his guilt. He leaned over and banged on the glass near my head. Vivian, tell him I'm taking you to the ER. I looked at him through my half-open eyes. The face I had known for 10 years was now monstrous. I gathered every last remnant of my spirit and rasped out a single, broken word. Help. It was a whisper, but Hank heard it. He immediately yelled toward the abandoned lumberyard down the road. Hey! Over here! I need some help! Barking erupted from a chained dog in the distance. Another flashlight beam flickered from the lumberyard. Nolan backed away, his face ghostly white. He stared at the burner phone, then at me, his eyes filled with a toxic mix of hatred and sheer panic. Just then, a pair of blinding headlights cut through the rain. A Ford F-150 tore down the road at breakneck speed, the tires screeching on the wet asphalt as it slammed on the brakes. The driver's door flew open, and my brother, Julian Hayes, jumped out. His voice was raw and frantic. Vivian! Where is she? For the first time that night, I let the tears flow freely. I knew I wasn't entirely safe yet, but the darkness had finally been ripped open. Julian rushed over, his shirt only half buttoned, wearing flip-flops in the freezing rain. Just looking at him, I knew he had driven like a madman, fueled by a brother's worst nightmare. Hank held up a hand to stop Nolan and pointed at the back seat. She's inside. Something's really wrong. He had a tarp and a shovel, and some woman just ran off. Julian peered through the glass, his eyes landing on my pale face. I forced my eyes open. My eyelids felt glued together, but my lips mouthed one word: Julian. Julian's face drained of color. He yanked the door handle, but Nolan shoved himself in the way. Julian, back off! I'm taking her to the hospital, don't make a scene. Julian whipped around. His voice wasn't loud, but it was lethal. My sister is unconscious in your car. Her primary phone is at your house. And you drove her to the cemetery road. And you're telling me not to make a scene? Nolan stammered, still trying to spin his web. I panicked. I took a wrong turn. Her blood pressure dropped. I was just trying to save her. Julian looked at the blue tarp on the ground, the zip ties, the tactical shovel peeking out from under the car. He let out a dark, humorless laugh, his eyes bloodshot. Trying to save her? By packing a grave-digging kit? Nolan's face darkened. Watch your mouth. This is between me and my wife. Hank stepped in. Whatever it is, we wait till she's conscious. I've got sheriff's deputies en route. Hearing the word sheriff, Nolan froze, his face cycling from white to crimson. With the lumberyard guards running over, Nolan had zero chance to hide the evidence. He stood rooted in the mud. Julian reached into the car and gently pulled me into his arms. He whispered in my ear, I've got you, Vivian. Nobody is taking you anywhere. I wanted to grip his shirt, but my fingers only twitched. Julian turned to Hank. Can you get EMTs out here? I'm calling our mother. Hank nodded, staying on the line with dispatch. Julian wrapped his own rain jacket around me, then put his phone on speaker to call Eleanor. When she picked up, he kept it brief. Mom, I found her. She's weak. I'm getting her an ambulance. Oh, thank God. Eleanor's voice broke. Where are you? Send me the address. Listening to my mother sob, my heart ached worse than my throat. I felt like a little girl again, lying with a fever, just wanting to hear my mother's voice and cry. Before the ambulance arrived, Julian decided to drive me in his truck to meet them halfway. Hank secured the burner phone and warned everyone not to touch the evidence in the trunk until the deputies arrived. Julian carried me to his Ford. As we walked past Nolan, I cracked an eye open. He was standing motionless in the rain. The fake concern was gone, replaced entirely by the dread of a man caught in the act. On the way to the hospital, Julian kept talking to keep me awake. Vivian, stay with me. Don't go to sleep. Look at me. He talked about mundane things, Mom making beef stew, the apple trees blooming back in Linden, how I used to fall in the creek as a kid, things that had nothing to do with this nightmare, but tethered me to life. At the hospital, the stench of antiseptics hit my nose, and the fluorescent lights blinded me. Nurses rushed me into the ER, firing questions at Julian about what I ingested. Julian's voice was steady but vibrating with rage. She ate dinner at home, then collapsed. Couldn't speak. I suspect she was drugged with heavy sedatives. I wanted to add details, but my jaw wouldn't work. The chaos of blood pressure cuffs, IV lines, and beeping machines made my head spin. Soon after, Eleanor arrived. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. She ran in crying my name. She grabbed my hand. Hers was freezing and shaking violently. I forced my eyes open. Her face was blurred by tears, whether hers or mine, I didn't know. I'm here, baby, she sobbed, stroking my hair. Don't be scared, Mom is here. I wanted to apologize for making her witness this in her old age, but I only managed a faint sigh. She leaned her head against my bed and wept silently. Out in the hallway, Nolan had arrived. He was still playing the devoted husband. I heard him talking to a deputy. My wife has been really paranoid lately. She thought I was having an affair, she must have taken some pills and freaked out. I was rushing her to the ER, but the rain was blinding and I took a wrong turn. It's a huge misunderstanding. Julian cut him off immediately. Shut your mouth. The truth is going to be handled by the police and the toxicology report. Stop smearing my sister. Nolan lowered his voice. Look, Julian, you're her brother, I get it. But every marriage has rough patches. Don't blow this out of proportion so we can't even look each other in the eye later. Julian enunciated every word. Being kind doesn't mean being stupid. My sister is lying in a hospital bed, and you're worried about saving face? Lying in the room, tears streamed down my face. Even now, Nolan hadn't asked if I was okay or if I was scared. He was only terrified his mask was slipping. By dawn, the doctor informed us I was out of the woods but needed monitoring because my blood work showed dangerously high levels of a potent tranquilizer. Hearing that made Eleanor collapse into a chair. Julian caught her, his face as hard as granite. I woke up fully as the morning light filtered through the blinds. pale as dishwater. My throat was raw, my head pounded from the IV drip. The sterile smell of the hospital made me nauseous. Eleanor sat by my side, her back hunched after a sleepless night. Her hand was wrapped tightly around mine. Julian stood by the door, his eyes red, his shirt still stained with mud. "Mom," I croaked. She burst into fresh tears but tried to muffle them. "You're awake, Vivian, I'm here." I looked around, briefly disoriented like I was crawling out of a toxic nightmare. Then it all crashed back. The mushroom soup, the wine, the wrong turn, the tarp, the zip ties, Valerie in the shadows. I shuddered violently. Julian stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. "Breathe. You're safe." Hank handed over your burner phone. "The sheriff's department is investigating." I wanted to ask where Nolan was, but before I could speak, Beatrice's voice echoed in the hallway. She walked in carrying a bag of fruit, her face flushed. "Good Lord, Vivian. You scared me half to death. If you two are fighting, you deal with it at home. Why would you do something so foolish?" I stared at her. Her first words weren't to ask if I was okay. She had already branded me as foolish and suicidal. Eleanor stood up. "Beatrice, my daughter is weak. Watch what you say." Beatrice turned to my mother, her tone sickly sweet but laced with venom. "I'm heartbroken too, Eleanor. But they've been arguing for months. Vivian holds on to grudges, she hoards the money and the deeds, and suspects Nolan of everything. When a woman overthinks things, she brings misery on herself." My mother trembled. She was not a confrontational woman. She lived a quiet life, giving us money just to ensure we had a roof over our heads. And now, this woman stood at my hospital bed, acting as if my attempted murder was my own fault. Julian stepped in, his voice icy. "Have you said enough?" "My sister was found in a car on an abandoned road, heavily sedated. The investigation is ongoing, but it is absolutely not your place to stand here and blame her." Beatrice pursed her lips. "You're her brother, you defend her. But every family has drama. If you blow this up, people will laugh at both our families." Hearing that, I forced myself to sit up. Eleanor rushed to support my back. My voice was raspy, but I spoke clearly. "Beatrice, I almost died. If you still call this family drama, how far does it have to go before you call it attempted murder?" Beatrice looked at me, a flash of guilt in her eyes, but she quickly sighed. "You're sick, so I won't hold that against you. I won't hold that against you." Those words chilled me faster than the rain. They were painting me as the crazy, jealous wife, graciously offering me forgiveness for my own victimization. It proved that when people want to bend the truth, they will twist anything. That afternoon, Martha Higgins called me. I couldn't hold the phone, so Julian put it on speaker. Her voice was hesitant. "Vivian? Honey, I heard from Beatrice. Please don't be too sad. Women who have hot tempers only hurt themselves. Even if Nolan was doing business with another woman, it might not be what you think." I closed my eyes. Beatrice had already spread her narrative to the neighbors. Julian spoke into the phone. "Martha, Vivian is in the hospital. The facts aren't out yet. Please don't listen to one side and blame her. It's cruel." Martha apologized profusely and hung up. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I used to fear losing my house, losing my husband, a broken marriage. Now I realized there was something equally agonizing. Having your reputation dragged through the mud while you're too weak to even stand. Julian arranged for me to be discharged to my mother's house in Linden for outpatient recovery. He said staying in Bellingham would only invite more toxic visits from my in-laws. Eleanor nodded, her eyes swollen. Before leaving the room, I looked out the window. Nolan was in the parking lot, pacing on his phone. He looked tense. I stopped crying. Tears are for weakness, but when you've cried them all out, your heart hardens like baked clay. I told myself, if they want to paint me as a hysterical woman to cover their crimes, I will stay lucid enough to drag the truth into the blinding light. Julian drove us to Linden that afternoon. Eleanor sat next to me, gripping my hand. Her frail hands with their blue veins gave me an anchor. Her house sat off a quiet rural road, surrounded by apple orchards and a small creek. Getting out of the car, I smelled damp hay and the comforting scent of home cooking. 10 years as someone's wife, and the moment I nearly lost my life, I returned to my childhood home like a battered runaway. Eleanor led me to my old bedroom, setting up a clean bed. "Rest, baby. Let Julian handle the rest." I lay down but couldn't close my eyes. Every passing car made my heart jump. The sound of the trunk opening, the tarp rustling, Valerie asking about the dosage, it all looped in my brain. Julian brought me a glass of warm water. "Vivian, we need to secure your documents. Are the originals still at the house?" I nodded weakly. "Yes, I checked, but the photocopies were missing." Julian frowned. "Missing copies is a huge red flag. They can't transfer a deed with copies, but scammers use them to draft fake escrows, pull permits, or con buyers into placing cash deposits. After barely an hour of rest, I begged Julian to take me back to Bellingham. Eleanor objected, but I insisted. If you wait, evidence gets scrubbed. Julian agreed, but made me stay in the truck while he went inside. He opened the house. It still smelled faintly of truffle soup. The anniversary dinner had been hastily cleared, but a red wine stain remained on the table. The white lilies had wilted. Things that were romantic symbols yesterday were now crime scene artifacts. Wearing latex gloves he bought at a pharmacy, Julian opened the filing cabinet. The original deed, the $150,000 wire receipt, the signed ledger, our marriage certificate, they were still there. I exhaled, but before I could relax, he checked the secondary drawer. The photocopies were drastically depleted. I remembered leaving 5 full packets of documents. Now there were only 2, completely out of order. A paperclip lay at the bottom of the drawer, proving someone had frantically rifled through them. Julian photographed everything. When was the last time you saw these fully stocked? 3 weeks ago, I whispered. Nolan asked for a utility bill. I gave him the key while I was cooking. Julian gritted his teeth. So he's been planning this for a while. Not just a day or two. That realization paralyzed me. The most terrifying disasters don't strike randomly. They are meticulously plotted by the person sleeping next to you. Just then, Julian's phone rang. It was Marcus Reed, his realtor friend in Bellingham. Julian put it on speaker. Julian, you asked me about the house on 5th Street? Someone is quietly shopping it around for $300,000 cash. I shot up, dizzy but alert. $300,000? Marcus lowered his voice. Hey, Vivian. Honestly, your house is worth at least $450. Selling it for $300 cash is a fire sale. Total red flag. And the guy probing the market wasn't Nolan. It's a guy named Damien Thorne. He claimed the owners were underwater and the paperwork would be sorted out soon. Julian looked at me, his face dark. I felt my stomach drop. The house I maintained for 10 years, the house built partly on my mother's sold farmland, was being peddled in the shadows like stolen goods. Marcus added, Thorne asked me if a husband and wife hadn't aligned their signatures yet. Was there a way to lock in a cash deposit? It smelled dirty, so I called you. Julian thanked him and hung up. The air in the truck was suffocating. They didn't just want you out of the house, I whispered. They wanted time to liquidate it. Julian nodded. Exactly. If they successfully branded you a runaway wife, Nolan could claim he couldn't reach you, forge some preliminary documents with Valerie, take a massive cash deposit, and drag out the process. A greedy buyer might look the other way for a cheap house. I shuddered. For so long, I thought holding the original deed was enough, but greedy people don't just take one path. They manufacture lies, apply pressure using family dynamics, and weaponize public gossip to corner you. That evening, Beatrice called me. I stared at her name on the screen, my hands turning to ice. Julian signaled me to answer on speaker. Her voice was as sweet as ever. Vivian, honey, are you feeling better? I think you should come home and talk to Nolan. Husband and wife shouldn't let the in-laws get too involved. People will laugh at us. I replied slowly. I'm still weak. And this isn't just a marital spat anymore, Beatrice. She paused, then sighed. You're young and so stubborn. That house belongs to both of you. If Nolan made a mistake, it's because of business pressure. If you blow this up, he loses his reputation. Will that make you happy? I looked at the wilted lilies in my mind. Beatrice, I almost didn't survive to be happy or sad. If you truly cared for me as a daughter, you would ask who stole my paperwork, not if I'm ruining your son's reputation. You're being incredibly disrespectful, she snapped. I hung up. For the first time in 10 years, I hung up on my mother-in-law. Not because I lost my manners, but because I understood that some calls aren't meant to check on you. They are just traps to pull you back in. That night, Julian brought all my original documents to Linden and locked them in his gun safe. I sat on the porch watching the rain hit the rain barrels. In the sound of the water, the conspiracy behind that anniversary dinner became crystal clear. It wasn't just about silencing me for a night. It targeted my home, my dignity, and the life my mother and I had painstakingly built. The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bed. Outside, Eleanor was cooking a pot of pork congee for me. The smell of scallions, black pepper, and wood smoke drifted in so simple, yet it broke my heart. If it weren't for the bruises on my wrists and my raw throat, I would have thought the cemetery road was just a nightmare. Julian came over early, carrying a notepad filled with timelines. He wasn't a lawyer or a cop, but he had the meticulous mind of a business owner. He knew that to expose a liar, tears weren't enough. I asked around, Julian said, setting his phone down. That Valerie Pierce girl is bad news. He pulled up a photo. Valerie was standing in front of a billboard for a suburban housing development, wearing a crisp white blouse, her hair curled perfectly, smiling brightly. The caption promised exclusive insider deals and massive ROIs. Looking at her face made me nauseous. When she came to my house, she was so polite. "Hi, Vivian. Nolan says you're so meticulous. A woman who knows how to run a household is a blessing." I had cut up fresh mango for her. That mango wasn't as sour as her soul. Julian pointed at a note. Nolan met her looking at real estate. She was his broker. Then she convinced him to go in on a land flip. She promised a massive return. Nolan pulled cash from his secret accounts and took out loans. When the deal went south, she told him they needed to double down to recover the losses. "And who is Damien Thorne?" I rasped. "A predatory private lender. He doesn't break legs. He writes investment contracts and bridge loans with insane default penalties. If you sign, he owns you." A chill ran down my spine. Thorne didn't need a baseball bat. He used legal jargon to put a noose around your neck. Paper can be softer than a knife, but it cuts much deeper. The total debt ballooned to 120 grand, Julian continued. I found a mutual contact who saw texts. Thorne gave Nolan 5 days to produce the cash or hand over the house as collateral. I sat completely still. $120,000. A sum large enough to blind a man, but not large enough to justify sacrificing his wife. I remembered Nolan saying, "I'm just thinking about business ventures." His ventures were paved with lies, infidelity, and hidden debts. Eleanor brought the congee in, her hands shaking so badly the bowl rattled. My God, if he was in debt, he should have just said something. I could have sold the cows. Julian could have chipped in. Why would he try to kill my daughter? I grabbed her hand. "Mom, don't think like that. Our family is not responsible for paying off his greed." Julian nodded. Exactly. Nolan wasn't pushed off a cliff. He had a dozen chances to confess, but he chose to lie. He chose the loan. He chose the mistress. And he chose to sacrifice his wife. That afternoon, Julian's realtor friend called back. He said someone had spotted Valerie and Damien Thorne at a coffee shop near the county courthouse. They were discussing the 5th Street house, explicitly mentioning a stubborn wife and a plan to ensure she was absent so the husband could sign the preliminary paperwork. Hearing absent gave me goosebumps. To them, I wasn't a human being. I was a missing signature, a stubborn obstacle, a lock on a vault. If Hank hadn't driven by, if you hadn't shown up, I asked Julian, would they have really made me a missing person? Julian was quiet for a long time. I think so, at least for a few days. Enough time to take the cash deposit, hide the paperwork, and construct a narrative. That evening, Nolan texted me. Just one line. "Don't listen to outsiders, Vivian. I will explain everything." I stared at the screen, then handed it to Julian. He read it and said, "Don't reply. Guilty people always want to isolate their victims to twist the narrative." I agreed. Before, a simple text asking what I wanted for dinner would soften my heart. Now, his text only reminded me of the truffle soup. I put the phone down, feeling a strange clarity. The monster isn't the person who makes a mistake. The monster is the person who digs a hole, makes a mistake, digs it deeper, and then tries to push an innocent person in so they can climb out. Around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Ever since that night, late phone calls made my heart palpitate. Julian was sitting on the porch. He walked in quickly. I showed him the number. He signaled me to put it on speaker, but to stay quiet. I answered. Silence, then a frantic, hushed woman's voice. "Vivian? It's Valerie." My blood ran cold. Eleanor was asleep in the next room, so Julian gently shut my door. I kept my voice perfectly level. "What do you want?" Valerie was hyperventilating, her sweet tone completely gone. "You have to listen to me. Nolan is blaming everything on me. He told the cops I manipulated him, that I planned it. But it's not true." I closed my eyes. The woman who stood by the trunk asking if the dosage was high enough was now crying for fairness. It was sickening. "I'm not interested in your excuses," I said. "No, wait, I have proof. I have texts from Nolan. He's the one who said to leave your phone at home. He's the one who packed the duffel bag with your clothes. He sent me the pin for the cemetery road." Julian's eyes widened. He grabbed a pen and started furiously taking notes. "Then what were you doing there?" I asked coldly. Valerie went dead silent. I articulated every word. "You knew I was drugged. You knew I was in the car. You saw the tarp, the zip ties, the shovel. You didn't call for help. You rushed him to finish the job. Now you expect me to believe you're a victim?" Valerie burst into tears. But those tears weren't out of remorse. They were the tears of a rat trapped on a sinking ship. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But I didn't think he would go that far. I thought he was just going to make you sleep, hide you in a motel for a few days so he could forge the escrow. I didn't think. You didn't think, but you still showed up. I cut her off. That hit her where she couldn't argue. Julian signaled me to keep her talking. I hit record on his phone. You said you have texts, I pressed. I'll send them to you, Valerie begged, but you have to promise not to drag me down. I was conned by Nolan too. I owe Damien money. I can't go to prison. I looked at the purple bruises on my wrists where Nolan had dragged me. I felt a profound, chilling calmness. Valerie, you can save yourself by telling the truth to the police. As for what you did to me, I have no right to override the law and absolutely no obligation to save you. Only heavy breathing came through the line. A moment later, my phone chimed with messages. Valerie had sent a barrage of screenshots. Julian and I looked at them. First text from Nolan. Meet at the old spot on the 18th. I'll bring Vivian out, leaving her main phone here. Second text. Bag is packed. Coat, sneakers, scarf. Tomorrow morning I'll say she threw a fit and left. Third text. The one that made my blood freeze. Are you sure the stuff you gave me puts them under deep? I can't have her screaming in the middle of the road. My vision blurred. It wasn't a theory anymore. My own husband had texted his mistress to confirm the efficacy of the drugs he was putting in my anniversary dinner. Julian gripped his pen so hard the plastic snapped. Valerie spoke again, her voice tiny. See? It wasn't just me. Nolan orchestrated it, and Damien Thorne pushed us. He threatened to ruin our reputations if we didn't pay. Did Thorne know about the plan that night, I asked. Not the details, she hesitated. But he knew Nolan needed you out of the picture for a few days, and he said as long as there was a plausible excuse to lock in the escrow deposit, he didn't care how we did it. Julian wrote down every word. His face was a thundercloud. Send those to the deputies tomorrow, I told her. Are you crazy? If I go to the cops, Nolan will kill me. I scoffed. You're afraid he'll kill you, but you weren't afraid to watch him kill me. Silence stretched for an eternity. Then, barely a whisper. Vivian, there's a lumberyard near that road. I saw a security camera on their front gate. It might have caught Nolan's car driving past. She sent the address. Julian photographed it immediately. After hanging up, I stared at the screen. The man who used to text me to ask if I wanted him to pick up groceries was the same man asking how to knock me unconscious. Julian backed up the photos. I'm taking this to the detectives tomorrow, and I'm getting that camera footage. I nodded, the tears completely gone. I realized then that the truth rarely comes from good people. It comes from accomplices terrified of taking the fall alone. The next afternoon, the rain returned to Linden. I sat by the window, sipping warm tea. Julian was out hunting down the security footage. Around 4 o'clock, a hoarse voice called out from our front gate. Eleanor? Is Vivian home? I knew the voice immediately. Silas Sterling, my father-in-law. Eleanor walked out to the porch, keeping her distance. I stood up and looked through the screen door. Silas stood under the awning, his flannel shirt soaked on one shoulder, holding a tightly knotted black plastic bag. He looked like he was carrying a boulder on his back. What do you want, Silas? Eleanor asked coldly. He lowered his head. I need to see Vivian. I have something to tell her. If she won't see me, I'll leave this and go. I stepped out. Despite my anger, I said, Come in, Silas. He sat on the wicker chair on the porch. Eleanor poured him a cup of hot tea. His hands shook so badly the tea sloshed over the rim. I've failed you, Vivian, he whispered. I stayed silent. An apology now was like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. He opened the plastic bag and pulled out an old prepaid SIM card, a folded piece of paper, and a scrap with a phone number. He laid them on the table like he was confessing a sin. Beatrice made me buy this burner SIM under a fake name at the flea market. She said it was for Nolan's business calls, so he wouldn't be bothered. I thought it was weird, but I didn't push it. I stared at the tiny piece of plastic. So small, yet hiding so many lies. Silas choked up. I overheard Beatrice and Nolan arguing. Nolan said you wouldn't sign. Beatrice told him if you wouldn't sign, he had to scare you. Make you leave the house for a few days. She said a woman running back to her mother's house will eventually come crawling back. Eleanor slammed her cup down. She knew he was planning something and she encouraged it. Silas hung his head lower. She said she was just venting, just trying to break Vivian's pride. I convinced myself it was just talk. Did you know about the drugs? I asked. He shook his head violently. No, I swear to God, no. If I knew he was going to drug you, I would have died before letting him. I just thought he was in debt and Beatrice was running her mouth. I looked at him for a long time. I believed he wasn't the mastermind, but believing him didn't numb the pain. Some people don't hold the knife, but they watch someone sharpen it and look the other way. He slid the piece of paper toward me. This is Damien Thorne's number. I found it in Nolan's jacket. And this. These are texts I copied down from Beatrice's phone. I don't know how to screenshot, so I wrote them out. I unfolded the paper. His handwriting was shaky but legible. Do whatever you have to do. Just don't let her keep the house. If she won't sign, make her leave. I have the photocopies. I'll give them to you when you need them. Every word was a rock thrown at my chest. Beatrice, the woman who lectured me on being a good wife, was texting her son behind my back to destroy me. Eleanor broke down. She didn't yell. She just looked at Silas, her voice trembling. You have a daughter, Silas. If her in-laws plotted against her like this, could you survive it? Silas buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving. I couldn't. That's why I'm here. I was a coward. I was scared of Beatrice, scared of Nolan going to prison, scared of ruining the family. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would blow over. Staying quiet to keep the peace only works for small things, I said softly. Staying quiet while evil grows doesn't bring peace. Silas nodded frantically. Will you tell this to the detectives? I asked. He dropped his hands, his eyes red but resolute. Yes. I didn't come here to ask for mercy for Nolan. He did the crime, he does the time. I just want to tell the truth. Even if it's late, Julian pulled into the driveway just then. He saw Silas, saw the evidence on the table, and immediately began photographing it. As Silas left in the twilight, he turned to me one last time. Vivian, I don't expect you to forgive us. I just want you to live a good life. Don't let the sins of my family make you live in fear. I watched his silhouette fade into the rainy dusk. I didn't cry. I just felt an immense weight settle, yet clarify, in my mind. Life isn't just made of good and evil people. It's filled with silent people. And sometimes, their silence is the longest shadow that protects the monsters. 2 days later, Julian informed me the detectives had logged Valerie's texts, the lumberyard camera footage, Hank Brody's statement, and the evidence Silas provided. The noose was tightening. That afternoon, Beatrice called Eleanor. She didn't call me, probably knowing I wouldn't answer. Her voice on speakerphone was unusually subdued. Eleanor, I want us to sit down. We've been in-laws for 10 years. Let's handle this behind closed doors before the town tears us apart. I nodded to my mother. Not to negotiate, but because there were things that needed to be said to their faces so they could never claim it was a misunderstanding. The meeting happened at Eleanor's house. Julian left the front door wide open so the neighbors knew people were inside. On the table sat a simple pot of tea. Beatrice arrived first, her hair tied back, looking haggard but still clinging to her superiority. Silas followed quietly, sitting on the edge of the sofa. Nolan walked in last. He looked gaunt, a rough scruff on his jaw, but when he looked at me, I didn't see remorse. I saw a man calculating his escape route. Beatrice started. Vivian, I know you're angry, but 10 years of marriage isn't something you throw away. Nolan made a mistake, but business pressure makes men do foolish things. As a wife, you have to find it in your heart to understand. I looked at her, my voice dead calm. Where exactly was he foolish? Was it when he handed me forged escrow papers? When he left my phone at home? Or when he drove me to a cemetery road while I was paralyzed? Beatrice paled. That's a harsh way to put it. He didn't want you dead, he just panicked. Julian slammed his hand on the table. Panicked? He packed a tarp, zip ties, a shovel, and a decoy bag of her clothes. If that's him panicking, his clear head must be downright psychotic. Suddenly, Nolan dropped to his knees in front of me. He clasped his hands, his voice cracking. Vivian, I was wrong. Valerie manipulated me, Damien Thorne threatened me. I owed money, I was terrified of losing face. Please forgive me, 10 years. You can't push me over the edge. I looked at the man on his knees weaponizing our 10 years together, and I felt absolutely nothing. Did you think about my edge when I was lying in the back of your car? I asked. Did you think about what my mother would do the next morning when the sheriff told her I was missing? He stared at the floor. I know my crimes. He choked out. But you're alive, Vivian. By the grace of God, nothing permanent happened. Don't take this past the point of no return. The room went dead silent. That sentence was a poison pill. Eleanor clutched her chest. Julian stood up, furious, but I held up my hand. I looked at Nolan. He never cared if I was terrified. He only cared that his life was imploding. Because I was still breathing, he believed his crime should be downgraded. A mistake is a momentary lapse, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Buying drugs, leaving my phone, driving me to the woods, packing a shovel, and planning my disappearance is a meticulously plotted choice. Beatrice scrambled to intervene. But you have to look at your part in this. If you hadn't held the deed hostage, if you trusted your husband, Nolan wouldn't have been pushed into a corner. Eleanor stood up. The gentlest woman I knew was shaking with rage. Beatrice! My daughter held onto her documents to protect the sweat and blood of our family. She refused to sign a fraudulent paper. How is that a crime? She endured your family for 10 years, to the point of nearly being murdered, and you want her to endure more to save your face? Beatrice was struck dumb. Silas kept his head bowed, his hands gripping his knees. I turned to Beatrice. I used to call you Mom. I respected you. But from the moment you plotted to kick me out of my own home, the mother I saw in you died. Beatrice gasped. You have no respect. I have exactly the respect you earned, I replied. Nolan crawled closer, trying to grab my hand. I yanked it away. Vivian, don't be this ruthless. If I lose you, the house, everything, how am I supposed to live? When you drove me to the cemetery, I asked, did you ask how I was supposed to live? He had no answer. Because there is no answer. Silence is the ultimate confession. Julian dropped a stack of papers on the table. The camera footage stills, Valerie's texts, the wire transfer receipts, the missing photocopies log. My family is cooperating fully with the prosecutor. Vivian keeps what is legally hers. Whoever broke the law answers for it. Don't ever use the word family to bully a victim again. Beatrice burst into tears, but they didn't sway me. I had heard enough morality preached by thieves. I stood up, my legs still slightly weak, but my spine straight. I am filing for divorce, I announced. I am protecting my legal assets. And I am testifying to exactly what happened, not adding a word, not omitting a word. As of today, I am no longer a part of your family. Outside, the wind rustled the apple trees. Nolan remained on his knees on the hardwood floor. Beatrice sobbed, and Silas wept silently into his hands. I felt no triumph. I only felt a heavy, rusted door in my heart finally swing shut. Sometimes, families don't break because a woman refuses to compromise. They break because they force a woman to compromise so much that she is asked to trade her life and dignity for their comfort. And at that point, compromise is no longer a virtue. It is a suicide pact. The aftermath exhausted me, not from weakness, but because severing a 10-year life takes a massive toll on the human soul. I didn't waver. Julian took me to every deposition. I recounted the dinner, the dizziness, the car ride, the tarp, the shovel, Valerie, and Hank Brody. Hank testified perfectly. The lumberyard footage corroborated the timeline. My burner phone audio caught the incriminating whispers. Valerie, terrified of taking the fall alone, flipped on Nolan and Damian Thorne. Thorne's predatory lending documents were seized, turning his paper weapons into his own handcuffs. Beatrice couldn't play the matriarch anymore. Her texts were public record, forcing her to lower her head in town. The divorce was brutal but decisive. The $150,000 from my mother was legally shielded. The equity was divided by the courts. I took what was mine, nothing more, nothing less, refusing to let them steal my mother's legacy. Today, I went back to the house on 5th Street one last time to collect my remaining boxes. The sun was shining. The wisteria petals had fallen, leaving mud-stained purple streaks on the driveway. I walked through the living room, looking at the spot where the anniversary dinner took place. The smell of truffle soup was gone, but the memory still made my throat tighten. Beatrice was standing by the kitchen. She looked aged, her gray roots showing. For the first time, she had no arrogance. For what it's worth, you were my daughter-in-law. I picked up my last box. I was your daughter-in-law. But I was never a bargaining chip to pay off your son's debts. I didn't wait for her reply. Some words aren't meant to win an argument. They are meant to put a period at the end of your own pain. I moved back to Linden. My life is not glamorous. In the mornings, I help Eleanor tend the garden. In the afternoons, I organize my paperwork. At night, I listen to the crickets. Sometimes a passing truck makes me flinch. Sometimes the smell of mushrooms makes my stomach turn. The wounds haven't fully healed, but at least I no longer sleep next to the person holding the knife. I learned that a woman in her 40s shouldn't fear starting over. She should only fear staying in the dark with someone actively digging her grave. Marriage requires trust, but trust cannot be blind. Forgiveness is beautiful, but before a woman forgives anyone, she must first know how to save herself. Love your family, but never love them so much that you trade your sanity and your life to keep the peace.